All right, so Apple's September event went down today, and they announced a whole bunch of cool stuff. I want to talk about the things that I thought were most interesting. The first is that new Apple Watch Ultra. So this is their new watch for extreme sports. It's big, it's rugged, it's expensive, it's like $800 to start. It's very ultra. It has a large 49mm case, it's a titanium case, and has a second button on the left side. It's like this orange colored customizable action button, and the casing is also designed differently. So on a regular Apple Watch, the casing kind of curves up and it meets the glass into this like rounded edge or rounded corner on the device. But on the Apple Watch Ultra, the casing actually goes up the side and it meets the screen on this flat edge. So the screen is better protected, but the screen is also a completely flat surface. So the Ultra has a larger screen and a brighter screen. It goes up to 2000 nits outdoors. It has dual frequency GPS. There are more mics and an extra speaker so you can use it better for communication. And it has a slew of watch bands that are designed around different sports. Now, I can't talk about this device from the perspective of someone trying to do like extreme weather mountain climbing, or if they're trying to run like an ultra marathon and they need some kind of hardware to help guide their experience. But I can talk about this from the perspective of diving, because there was a point in my life when I was pretty sweaty about scuba diving. And from the perspective of, like, I would consider myself moderately advanced, okay? I've done a ton of dives, and the idea of this device is really neat, but I feel like it's really more for recreational divers than anything else. Like anyone who's even semi-serious about scuba, you look at it and you kind of look into it. First of all, it doesn't have air integration. So on your air tank, if you're underwater, you normally have like a wireless transmitter that sends data to your dive computer that tells you how full your air tank is, right? And there's SPGs, you can use like kind of analog versions of it, but most people prefer the wireless transmitter, and it just monitors how much air you have left in your tank. The current iteration of the software and the hardware of Apple Watch Ultra does not support this. Now, I don't know if it's like something that can be implemented with just a software tweak, but without wireless air integration, it doesn't feel advanced enough for an $800 watch. Also, the controls, like normally you want buttons, lots of buttons to be able to manipulate the menus, because you're dealing with potentially life-critical data that you have to manage, right? And to rely on 2 buttons and a touch screen, I don't know. I think for the serious diver, they'd probably look at this and be like, it's cool as a backup watch, or maybe for logging your dives, for sure, right? Having access to that on your phone, it's cool, but people are looking at this Apple Watch Ultra to replace their wrist-mounted computer for whatever extreme sports that they're doing, right? Whatever hardware, ultra marathon runners use on the wrist. Like it's probably some Garmin or some Suunto product. I know nothing of that world. But this product, the Apple Watch Ultra, competes with some very established brands in their respective sports categories. Like maybe I chose the category that's the most difficult for the Apple Watch Ultra to perform in. Like if you look at the water resistance on this watch, it goes, I think 100 meters for water resistance, but they recommend that you don't go deeper than 40 meters on a dive with it. And I don't know, it feels like this can get really good in the future, but generation 1, at least with divers, not amazing yet, but I do think there's potential for it to get really good in the future. It's just software. The other watch of interest to me was that new Apple smartwatch SE. So this is a very recently purchased SE. I got this 6-7 weeks ago. Should have waited, man. I should have waited. But this new SE has a color-matched nylon back, so it's probably gonna be a little bit cheaper for them to produce this model than the outgoing SE. Still has the new S8 chip, but there's no ECG, there's no blood oxygen, and there's no always-on display. And it's also missing the new temperature sensor that we see on the new Series 8 Apple Watch. But the SE does have the new feature that is on every single new Apple Watch, as well as every single new iPhone, and it's their new crash detection hardware. So this is a series of hardware. It's a new gyroscope and a new high-G accelerometer. And if you're driving a car and you suddenly get into a bad car crash, the new Apple Watch and the new Apple iPhones can pick up on that. So the microphone would probably pick up some loud impact noise, and then the accelerometers would detect some kind of high-G deceleration, and then the barometer would detect an abrupt air pressure change that comes from the airbag deploying. And when all of those things happen, the watch will think that you might have been in an accident, and it'll check in with the user, and it'll try to contact emergency services if you don't respond to it within a certain amount of time. Okay, the Apple AirPods 2. So these are coming at $249. The competition for this space though is very competitive nowadays. Like the whole in-ear active noise cancellation earbuds. These ones come with a lot of new updates. It has the new H2 chip, which supposedly cancels twice as much noise as the first generation. It's got a touch capacitive stem, so you can adjust the volume on the device itself instead of using your phone. It has a new driver and amp for better sound quality. It's got better battery life. It's now at 6 hours and 30 hours with the case, and the case is much improved. So this still has Qi wireless and Lightning wired charging, but you can also use it with the Apple Watch charger, like that puck that comes with the watches. You can plug it up to the back and it'll charge with that. But it also has a speaker built into the case. If you ever lose the case without the AirPods inside it, it's now a lot easier to find it. And it also has the location services. So if you ever want to use like the Find My app, you can just locate it through that technology. There's also this interesting feature, yeah, let's call it a feature, that they mentioned. It's not just with the new AirPods Pro 2, but it's with any of the iOS 16 devices that can kind of make this happen. So using the Face ID camera, you can get this kind of spatial map of your head and ear shape, and it'll adjust the spatial audio experience based on the size and shape of your head and ears. And if you're wondering how this works, like the way that the human ears perceive sound, if sound's coming from in front of you or behind you, it's slightly different in terms of like how the sound waves hit the eardrums. Like it's like some frequencies are muted a little bit when they come from behind you, just because like the cartilage in your ears and like the flesh in your earlobes. So this software is recreating that attenuation of sound and it pipes it into your ears. So it seems like sound's coming from behind you or in front of you. Any kind of like positional audio done with two earbuds or earphones works like this. But by having a map of your head and like your ears, it can build a much more accurate version of it. It's really cool. Okay, let's talk about the phones. So there are a couple features that are present on all of the new phones. So both the regular iPhone 14s as well as the Pro models. So the first is the new hardware for crash detection I talked about earlier, so the new gyroscope and accelerometers. That stuff is also present in the phones, but also new for this year is their new emergency SOS via satellite feature. So this is a feature that allows these new iPhones to communicate with a low Earth orbit satellite in case of an emergency. So if you have no cell signal, but you're in this situation where you need to make some kind of text communication with someone, you can hook up with one of those satellites by following the positioning instructions on your phone, and it only works in US and Canada right now. But if you have all those things lined up, you can make a satellite communique. That is crazy. Like that is, again, something you would likely never use, hopefully never use, but if you need it, it is available. And I imagine this is going to roll out to other countries in the near future. Okay, so the iPhone 14s. So the mini is gone. You get the iPhone 14 and the 14 Plus, and it comes in 5 colors. The blue looks really nice to me. Both sizes still have the A15 Bionic chips. It's a very capable chip, but it's still the same chip that was in last year's iPhone 13 family, so it's a little bit weird. The front-facing camera now has autofocus, which is a first for the iPhones, and the rear cameras are still in that kind of diagonal orientation, but the main camera has been upgraded. It has a new sensor, it's got bigger aperture, and the shots go through a new image processing pipeline that they call the photonic engine, which is supposed to increase the low-light performance quite significantly, which we'll test in the future review. But they also showcase this super impressive stabilization mode called action mode. It uses the whole sensor and it's able to deliver some crazy levels of stabilization. It almost looks like a gimbal. Now, when I first saw this, my first reaction was like, there's no way. Like, there's no way that this is real, right? Like, I don't know, like in this shot, it does look like the stabilized footage is coming from a different angle, and the crop is very aggressive. It looks like they've chopped off like, I don't know, 30, 40% of the frame to pull this off. It's a heavy crop, but that stabilization is fantastic. I really want to test that out properly. Okay, the iPhone 14 Pro. So a couple features kind of stuck out to me. Number one, the always-on display. This is a feature that Android phones have had for a really long time, but now it's available on the iPhone 14 Pro, and it just allows the device to have its screen always on. Now, the idea behind it is that because it's an LTPO panel that can downclock to 1 hertz, it's like a very, very slow refresh rate, it can preserve a decent amount of battery life. You can just keep that screen on without using a ton of juice. But it's also impressive that Apple's claiming even longer battery life this year, even with that always-on display tech. But the coolest thing that I think they showcased this year was the dynamic island. So on the iPhone 14 Pro models, instead of a notch, they now have a pill-shaped cutout that floats on the upper portion of the screen, kind of where the notch used to be. But this camera cutout has been cleverly used in their design as an interactable notification area. And this little pill can change its shape and size. And because it's designed and animated so well, it looks fantastic. Like the pill shape is always there. It's always this black section, right? But because the animations look so good, they've made this UI element something special. And that's like the genius of it, right? They took something that was an inconvenient obstruction and they leaned into it and they made it something that's an iconic element of their UI. It's so cool. And then developers can use this area. They can put their notifications or other UI elements into that space. It's so weird. Like, I mean, think about for how long pill-shaped cutouts have existed, right? Or just cutouts in general on front screens. And usually companies just try to hide it in some way or fashion through wallpapers or whatever. But to build an actual UI element around it and for it to look as good as this, I think is really neat. Okay, the iPhone 14 Pro cameras. The main sensor is now a much larger 48 megapixel sensor. And this is coming from years of 12 megapixel sensors on iPhone's best camera systems. So it's quite a significant jump in sensor megapixel count. And because the iPhone 14 Pro models use the new 4 nanometer A16 Bionic chip, this is probably the biggest jump in camera specs that we've seen from Apple in a really long time. I really need to see what Apple has done this year because it sounds very impressive. Okay, so that's the most interesting stuff to me at this event. I will be doing reviews on all of it, so if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video.